Talking Paranormal.
Right, so I start off with an apology for having kept you for a few minutes there, Craig. But yeah, welcome to our project.
Thank you.
And yeah, so I met you through your podcast. Can you tell me who you are, how that came about?
Yeah, well, I am an author. I've written a couple of books. I'm a researcher, mainly into the paranormal. I also host a podcast as well, called the Paranormal Pendle Podcast. I'm based in Lancashire, the northwest of England, a very paranormal area, very close to Pendle Hill, actually, which is well known for the 1612 Pendle witch trials, as we're coming up to Halloween. The area around here gets ridiculously busy with with witch tourism, as we call it, paranormal tourism. And yeah, we sort of came across each other, I think, on Facebook, and you've interviewed me and I've interviewed you, and we've discovered that we have some similarities in the type of stuff that we're interested in. Mainly the paranormal and that sort of stuff, and yeah, so it's always good to chat with like-minded people such as yourself, Chris.
Yeah, well, this is just one of those really relaxed chats. I mean, I know it's recorded, but the idea is you and I just chat like we would in a pub.
Yeah.
You know? So you're an author, and I know nothing of what you've written. So tell me about what you've written.
Yeah. Okay. So I've written two books, both mainly on the paranormal, although I do tend to sort of slip into UFOs and that sort of thing. Mainly because there is, I think, a little bit of a crossover between the two. The two books that I've written are based around a town in East Lancashire called Accrington, which is a very old mill town. The first book's called The Shadow Man of Accrington, and the second book's called The Black Monks of Accrington. And I'm actually doing some research at the minute into some material for hopefully a third book, which is as yet untitled, but it is going to be a little bit of a departure from what I've written in the past. But the first two books really were personal experiences of family and friends. I've been very fortunate that I've had paranormal experiences, which at the time probably didn't seem quite as important as they do now. The more research that I've done over the years, I've sort of realised that there were quite significant encounters. My wife lived in a extremely haunted 16th century farmhouse, where there was an awful lot of paranormal, especially poltergeist activity. And I've also collected stories from people over the years, especially when I decided I wanted to write the first book. And I started putting feelers out and talking to different people. I was quite surprised actually about the number of people who approached me and said, well, actually, I've got a story that I'd like to tell you.
Yeah.
And a lot of these stories really this is the first time they've ever been told. So for instance, in the first book, there's a story of a lady who lived in an extremely active house in a place called Clayton Moors, which is near Accrington, and it was relating to a coal pit disaster in the late 1900s. There was another lady who I spoke to who, quite randomly actually, it was strangely enough, it was a party that I was attending. It was a friend who was having an Easter party, because at the time we all had quite, I mean my son's just turned 16, but we're quite young kids, sort of like 12, 13, 14 in age, and because he's going back a couple of years now when I first started looking at writing the first book. And we had a sort of Easter party. We had all the kids there and everything. And it was a bit chaotic, and you have a few beers and what have you. You start talking to people who you've never met before. And I was introduced to a lady who lived in a house where she had the ghost of a little boy that she used to see, her daughter used to see and play with. So there are all stories like that they've probably never told people before, or certainly they haven't. They've never ended up in print. And it's nice really that people can trust you and tell you these stories, because of course, a lot of the times, people who are not interested in the paranormal, and people who are not um, actively engaged in doing investigations or doing research or talking to people who are doing research and investigations, you can sometimes feel a little bit vulnerable when you're talking to people about this sort of subject. And some people will feel quite uncomfortable. They'll feel that they're leaving themselves open to ridicule. And so it's nice, really, when people do speak to you and do tell you the stories and do tell you very personal stories about encounters that they've had that they probably wouldn't speak to other people about.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I forget actually, because when you're mixing with other investigators or whatever, or people who are interested in what you do, yeah, you forget, don't you, that some people will point blank just think you're crazy. And it's only when I'm looking at going into a new location thinking, oh, that mill looks really good, or that mechanics looks really an old building. And I think, I am not walking in to a room full of guys and saying, hey, is this place haunted? They just laugh you out of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can leave yourself open to a little bit of ridicule, and I'm still quite guarded when I speak to people who I don't know, or people who are not involved in research. When they ask me, because I'll sort of say, I've written a couple of books on the paranormal, and it's at that point where you think, it could go one of two ways. People are either really interested, or they'll just, point blank think you're a complete lunatic and nutcase, and not want to talk to you about the subject. So yeah, but strangely enough, the vast majority of people that I've met have been very open. So even if they've not had any stories to tell me themselves, they have been very open to listening and accepting, what I've said. So they've been really interested in the books. They've been really interested in the research, really interested in the podcast and the people that I've spoken to. And so that really is quite gratifying. That I think most people are quite open-minded about the subject, and certainly about paranormal, about UFOs, even things that are a little bit sort of more left field, like cryptids and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. I think people these days, because there's so much on the internet, because there's so much on YouTube, because there's so much on satellite TV, because we were brought up really on a diet of, most haunted and that sort of thing. I think people are a little bit more accepting of the subject now. So that's quite nice, really.
I think people that I know, I'm eager to tell people that I ghost hunt. I don't really have a boundary. I'm like, I want you to know what I know. And I think a lot of people around me go, well, I find it really interesting, Chris, because you seem like a no bullshit kind of guy. And so the fact that you're blatantly saying, yeah, you've witnessed some weird things is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm very similar. People who know me as a very straightforward um, sort of person. I'm not taken to flights of fancy. I'm quite serious most of the time. And I think, I think people probably believe me a little bit more because they know what sort of person I am. I'm not a fantasist. And I think people who meet me will realise that, and so therefore, what I can talk to people about, if they want to talk about the subject, is 100% genuine.
So let's drill down on some of these experiences of yours, if you would.
Okay, well, when I was a young child, I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandparents, and my granddad, he was called Bill for short. He was a great storyteller, and he loved telling ghost stories. He loved talking about sort of local folklore, legends, of which there are plenty in this area. And so really from an early age, I developed an interest, shall we say, in the paranormal, and anything really that's a little bit weird or a little bit strange, or also local history and that sort of subject. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean to say that I therefore, went out and started actively looking for experiences, for ghost experiences, because the first time that I saw something very strange, and this was what I now call the shadow man, an experience where I saw a shadow man. I was in my late teens, possibly early 20s. It was about the mid 80s, about 1985, 86, something like that. So I'd have been, I can't remember the exact date. I remember the incident. So I'd have been about 19, 20, something like that. So I wasn't actively looking for paranormal experiences at the time, and I was working in a private members club part time whilst I was going through college. It was late one evening, and I was working in the bar. I was on my own. There were no customers in, and there was a room to the side of the bar area with a serving hatch, which was sort of at waist height. Little opening, maybe sort of 4 feet square, something like that, into another room. And in that room there happened to be 3 full-sized 12-foot by 6-foot snooker tables.
Yeah.
But there was nobody in there, nobody playing snooker this particular evening. We had no members in at all. It was getting on for about 10 o'clock, which was the usual. Back in those days, that was the time when we used to close the bar.
Yeah.
And we had much more stringent opening hours, and it was getting to that time of the night where we were ready to close the bar. And as I said, there was nobody else at all in there. And I just noticed out of the corner of my eye, sort of my left peripheral vision, that there was something moving in the basically in the serving hatch, filling the serving hatch. And as I turned, I thought it must be a customer. Somebody must have come in by the side entrance and come into the snooker room and come up to the serving hatch, the bar area. And as I turned and looked, I realised actually that this wasn't a person at all. But what it was a very tall, very thin, very shadowy figure. It was almost translucent. I could almost see through it, but not quite. So it was quite substantial in that respect. It was like a sort of foggy mist, but it was very defined as a person, but with no features, no clothing, no facial features. Anything like that. But it was the really weird thing, and I remember thinking it was weird at the time, apart from the fact that what I was seeing was obviously weird, but it was wearing a hat, and it was almost like the best way to describe it was a fedora type hat. Now, I've done research a long time after, because for a long time I didn't. I remembered the incident, I remembered seeing it, I remember what happened after, which I'll come to in a sec. But I've done research since into this phenomena which people call shadow people or the shadow man, and on a lot of occasions they are wearing a hat. They call them the hat man as well.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Certain descriptions. Now, when this particular incident happened, I was stood there looking at this figure. And it was definitely, I would say it was sentient. I would say that it knew where it was, what was going on. But then it disappeared almost as quickly as I'd noticed it. And it was in the olden days, of course, before mobile phones, and we had an internal phone system in this building. It was, as I say, it was a private members club, and it was built on 3 floors. And I knew that the steward, who was the guy that was obviously paid to manage the club on a daily basis, he was called Bernard. He was upstairs on the 3rd floor. I knew he was up there stocking the bar up. So I picked up the internal phone system and rang up to the 3rd floor, and he picked the phone up, and I said, "Can you just come down, please? I think something really quite weird's happened." So he said, "All right." I thought, "Yeah, all right." So anyway, about 30 seconds later, I hear footsteps coming down the stairs, because it was like a big winding staircase, a magnificent building.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately burnt down now. Actually, it's quite
Right.
but it was a Gothic 1890, yeah, 1890 it was built actually. Magnificent place. So anyway, he came into the bar area, and he said, "What's wrong?" And he looked at me and he said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, "Well, yeah, strangely enough, I think I might have done." You got to bear in mind, you know, I'm about 20 years of age. I mean, if it happened to me now, I'd have reacted in a completely different way. But I'm 20
Yeah.
years of age, you know, I'm you know, cocky and know it all, and nothing phases me.
Mm.
And he said, he said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, "Well," I said, "There's this weird thing in the snooker rooms, like shadowy, like figure type thing." And he said, "Oh, you've seen it as well, have you?" And I said,
Wow.
"Oh, all right, okay." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I've seen it." He said, "No, you're not going mad." He said, "I've seen it." He said, "Quite a few members of staff over the years have seen it," because he'd been there quite a few years. So he said, "Quite a few members of staff have seen it." He said, "Many of them, once they've seen it, put the coat on, left, never come back again." And he said, "There's also been quite a few of the members have seen it over the years, and people just used to refer to it as the shadowy figure, you know, the ghost, really,
Yeah.
the shadowy ghost." So yeah, that was really the first experience I had. There was another experience that I had as well, probably happened about 2 or 3 months later. This was up on the 3rd floor. Actually, I was up there taking some stuff up to the 3rd floor. I think I was probably stocking the bar, to be honest. It was a Saturday morning, and we had like a little sort of storeroom around the back of the bar. And I went up the stairs, walked through, past the bar. I went into the storeroom at the back, and suddenly I heard this shattering of glass coming from the bar area. Now, back in those days, we had. I mean, you could probably still get them in some of the older pubs now, but do you remember the barrel glasses with the handles?
Well, the
Pint
dimples.
glasses?
The
Yeah, with
dimples.
dimples. Yeah, so
Yeah.
very very substantial glasses, really thick, really heavy, and we used to hang them up on hooks underneath the front of the bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were really substantial hooks, very deep, you know, sort of like maybe, you know, maybe 4 or 5 inches deep, something like that.
Mm. Yeah.
And we used to hang them up by the handles, and there was no way that they would fall off. You
No,
had to literally pick them up and lift them off like that, you know.
I agree.
So I came through from the storeroom, and in front of me on the floor in the bar was a smashed barrel glass. And obviously, when I looked up underneath the bar, I could see the hook, the empty hook. It was only one. It was right in the middle. There was probably, you know, 2, 3 dozen other glasses all hung up all around, but there was just this one, and it was on the floor and it was smashed. So first thing is, how did it fall off? Couldn't fall off. It had to be lifted off because the hook was intact.
Yeah.
The glass, you know, the handle wasn't going to break because, you know, they were thick,
Mhm.
half-inch thick handles. There's no way. Then it would have had to been thrown to the floor with force in order to break it, because I know from experience I'd actually dropped some of these glasses on occasions,
Yeah.
and they bounce. You know, they
Mm.
actually didn't break; they would bounce
Mhm.
because it was sort of, you know, there was like a rubber matting on the floor behind the bar because, you know, you used to get spills and all that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And they would bounce. Well, this had obviously been thrown on the floor with some force, and it had just, you know, broken into a million pieces, glass all over the floor. And thirdly, why did it happen at that particular moment when I happened to walk into the bar on that Saturday morning and walk into the, you know, into the storage area at the back? Why did it happen then? Why did it not happen 5 minutes before I went up or 10
Mm.
minutes after I left? It happened on that exact moment, just as I went in. And it was obviously, whatever had done it, it was obviously, it was poltergeist activity of some description,
Mm.
and it was obviously either trying to get me attention or it was trying to say to me, you know, go. And I know for a fact that there were a lot of other people who used to work up on that 3rd floor. The 3rd floor actually was a big ballroom area, believe it or not. It was a ballroom which had been built at the same time as the ballroom at Blackpool Tower.
Wow.
And it was the only other sprung floor. Not that I'm an expert in ballrooms, but it was the only other sprung floor ballroom, as well as the one at Blackpool Tower, which of course is famous. You know, people travel from all over the world. You know, for dancing. I mean, you know, that TV program. That BBC program, Strictly Come Dancing, goes there every year because it's iconic, and
Yeah.
and we're only, you know, it was the only other sprung floor ballroom in the country, so it was quite a special place. But there was a lot of people who, especially people who you know, had worked behind the bar over the years, again on this third floor, had been quite uncomfortable working there. There was an area, there was a sort of stage area on the opposite side of the room to the bar, and you could actually go around the back because there was a fire escape around the back, but there was storage area and what have you, and they used to have bands playing and all sorts of stuff. And I know that a lot of people I work with, when we had to go around and get stuff, because we used to store stuff behind there as well, quite a few people would say, I'm not going around there, I don't like it. It doesn't feel right. And it's a shame, really, that the building has unfortunately fallen into disrepair. And in fact, it was burnt down about 10 years ago. It was empty for quite a while, and then it was sadly the victim of arson. And so, unfortunately, there's no way of even doing an investigation there. But you know, if the place was still open, it would be an amazing place to investigate. There was definitely an awful lot of paranormal activity, and it will be interesting to see what happens, because the site is, or has been, earmarked for a number of years now for new buildings to be put up on the site. You know, possibly private flats, or that sort of thing. You know, and I think it'd be interesting to see if there is any paranormal activity once new buildings are put up, because that obviously, you know, would um, you know, suggest that it's the ground on which the building was built on, rather than the building itself that was holding these energies.
So, why would you think that the building not being there would affect the spirits?
Well, it depends whether the spirits were attached to the building or not. It depends whether they were actually part of the structure of the building, rather than what the building was built on. I do think that you know, people will probably know about the stone tape theory.
Yeah.
Which can either, in my opinion, be attached to an actual physical building, or it can be attached to the place where the building is built on. And I just think it will be interesting to see if there is any further paranormal activity once new buildings are put up on the site, because that would suggest that it's the actual site itself, you know, rather than the fabric of the building, which is no longer there.
Because stone tape and what you saw was contradictory. You saw a sentient, and you saw poltergeist activity, whereas stone tape theory is a recording. It's the theory is, you know, that it's So yeah, it would be interesting, I suppose, to do a Ouija board there. That's how I would work it.
It would be interesting to see if these entities were attached to the building, you know, rather than where the building was situated.
Yeah. So you saw a shadow form. My first experience as a kid in my bedroom was seeing like a gingerbread man. I always think of it as the snowman, you know, the Christmas film, The Snowman, stood with his arms outstretched. But that, I would imagine that was a shadow because it was already night and it was darker than my bedroom. But I'm wondering if, see, I've never seen a shadow figure as an adult. I mean, peripheral, yeah. But you know, when you're working in dim light like this, or dimmer, on an investigation, any movement prolongs, with your lighting, prolongs shadows, so it's very difficult to say. But you seem to see that thing head on. Now, was this shape like we're looking at each other now? Was it torso through this square serving hatch? Yeah.
Yes. So it was sort of midriff upwards, really. So
Yeah.
you know, sort of I don't know, should we say tummy button upwards?
Yeah.
That's sort of, you know, mid stomach sort of upwards, because it was probably about 3 or 4 feet up before the opening started, and then it was about 4 foot. So actually, it almost filled the opening, the serving hatch. So you know, it was probably about 7 or 8 feet tall. It was
Yeah.
certainly taller than me, and I'm 6'2",
All right.
and
Wow.
it was taller than me by probably a good foot. I mean, even from a distance, I was probably about 15 feet away from it. I was still looking up at it. So,
Yeah.
and it was filling the serving hatch, really. The
Yeah.
top of that, the top of the hat was sort of, you know, right up to the top of the serving hatch. So probably, you know, 7.5 feet, something like that, and then the hat on top of that. So it was quite a tall, thin, very thin torso and arms. So yeah, it was quite a strange experience, really.
Yeah. The Hat Man. Straight away, I'm always troubled by the fact that in the olden days, everybody wore hats. So you've just got to see any old spirit from that time, and you would say, "Oh, I saw a man in a hat." A man wearing a hat isn't like only one man wore a hat in those days. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how they can say the Hat Man is all the same man because it's always a silhouette. You know? Any comments on?
I mean, this was a fedora type hat. So it, again, when you look at reports from other places, you know, even from around the world, they all tend to mention that the hat is a fedora type hat as opposed to, you know, a sort of top hat or a flat cap or, you know, a different type of headwear. They all tend to sort of say that they are that particular type of fedora hat, you know.
Yeah.
So whether that has any relevance or not, I don't know.
Yeah. How many years ago were fedora hats popular then? Like 20s? I don't know.
Yeah, well, possibly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all quite popular these days, really.
Yeah.
You know, in certain, I mean, certainly, I don't know, 1940s, 1950s, maybe something like that. You know.
I just wonder whether we're starting now to project ghosts always wearing jeans. You know?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it'd have to be a fairly detailed
Yeah.
manifestation, wouldn't it? You know, to be able
Yeah.
to actually see what sort of clothes they're wearing. But you know, I mean, it's interesting. What the lady that I spoke to that I mentioned about the little boy, I mean, she was quite specific. You know, that he was wearing very old-fashioned clothes, and he had a flat cap on, and she said that she thought he looked sort of, you know, late Victorian, perhaps early Edwardian type clothing. And so she, you know, she was quite specific, being able to sort of describe what he was wearing, you know.
Yeah. Now, obviously, clothes don't have ghosts, do they? Clothes are not don't have spirits of their own. So when you see a spirit with clothes on, what's your theory on that? How?
That's an interesting question. I mean, so when you pass on, if you come back as a ghost, or if you can't move on, and so your spirit is still here, you know, do you manifest as the person you were when you passed on, or do you manifest as do you get a choice, for instance? So, you know, could I come back if I passed on now? Could I come back as my 20-year-old self, and look like my 20-year-old self, or is it that, you know, you are as an individual? If I saw a ghost, am I interpreting what I'm seeing in a different way to perhaps the way that you'd interpret that?
Yeah.
You know, is our perception different? It is quite strange that, I mean, people, you know, people when they see ghosts, 99.9%, well, in fact, I don't even know of anybody that's ever seen a naked ghost. They've
No.
always, you know, they've always been wearing clothes. Now, whether that's a recording, you know, whether that's something that is a snapshot in time, whether it's a time slip, whether it's I mean, poltergeists tend to be more physical and invisible, so they tend to move things around and create havoc without physically manifesting themselves. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and not one that I really have a definitive answer to be
Yeah.
quite honest, because when you die, why do you come back wearing clothes? Who knows?
Exactly.
It's a very good question.
I asked 10 or 12 mediums the same questions, and that was one of them. And they said that spirits can choose what to show themselves as because
Yeah.
they're amorphous. They can show themselves in their best health, the best period. And then other mediums said that yes, that's true. And a pure spirit is a bead of light.
Mm.
Do not confuse that with orbs, but a bead of light. I can't justify, I can't prove that, but they all seem to agree that ghosts projected themselves. So your shadow spirit hadn't taken a form, perhaps mine hadn't, so. But on the other hand of the scale, the end, I have heard, also when you're watching TV and stuff, I always notice that they say, "Oh no, they were as real as you and I," and then they just disappeared. I didn't know it was a ghost, and I'm like, "Wow, that's." You think of a ghost as this see-through shape, but real accounts, they're always totally hard. So how many times are you driving through the country lanes past this cyclist that isn't actually alive? You wouldn't know, would you?
No, you wouldn't. No, and I think a lot of it is down to individuals' perceptions. I think people will perceive things in a different way. So I think the way that I would perceive a spirit will probably be different to the way that somebody else would perceive that spirit, which is why some people say that they're seeing, what seems to be a completely solid figure, whereas other people will never see a solid figure. They will only see a sort of shadow or an outline or something out the corner of their eye. I mean, I tend to see things out the corner of my eye. I have never seen a fully formed spirit that looks like a person with all the details that you would expect to, when you meet somebody face to face, you see all the details, you see the hair follicles, you see the, the skin and clothes and everything else. I've never seen a spirit like that. So, but I can't say that people don't. It may well be that their perception is completely different to my perception.
Do you remember that only a few years ago, and it blew up the internet? It was called That Dress, and some people saw it as blue and black, and some people saw it as gold and brown, and it's all the same. It's the way your brain portrays it. So maybe that does play into it. Color blindness, for example, and some of us need glasses. My son will point to something on his hand and say, "Look at that!" And I cannot see it. He's like, "What do you mean? This spider?" But it's so thin, I literally can't see it with my glasses on.
Yeah. I mean, perception in general. I think the way that we perceive the world around us. I mean, who knows? You may perceive the world completely different to the way that I perceive it. I mean, it's the whole thing about colours. When I look at the colour red, I know it's red because that's the colour that that's red to me. Whereas to you, it might be red to you might be a completely different colour the way that you look at it, but you still refer to it as red.
Correct.
Because I look at it and I know it's red, then I think you think that the red, your red is the same as my red. I mean, if you go into it, really deeply, perception is quite a strange thing, and the way that our brains perceive the world around us, my world could be completely different to yours, but because we're used to interacting with each other in a certain way, we don't perceive that there's a difference.
Yeah, which is very difficult when you're trying to convince each other of what you saw or what you heard,
Absolutely, yeah.
So do you have any more ghostly stories from your life?
Yeah, my wife's got some interesting stories. When she lived at a farm. She her mum and stepdad bought a farm back in the 1980s, a place called Boomkirk Farm, very close to a town called Haslingden. It's on the north side of Manchester. So from Manchester, you've got the town of Bury, and then or Bury, depending on where you come from. And then just sort of north of that is Haslingden, Rottenstall, the Rosendale Valley. So that sort of area, Bacup and all around there. And they lived in a 16th century farmhouse, so it was built late 1500s, very old building, obviously. One of the oldest standing remaining farmhouses in Lancashire by all accounts. Still there now, even though they haven't lived there for 20 odd years. But when her mum and stepdad lived there, they converted quite a lot of the land into dog kennels and a cattery. And they had a resident poltergeist who was very active. They used to, as well as objects being moved around, doors being slammed, electrics going off at the, most inopportune moments. They used to hear this entity walking up and down the first floor landing in very heavy boots. Sarah said that it sounded like, sort of metal tipped hobnail boots. And it sounded like he was walking. Decided it was a he because he was so heavy-footed.
Yeah.
He was walking on stone flags. And the interesting thing was that it was actually wooden floorboards on the first floor landing, and they only realised what was going on actually when they had to start taking up floorboards because they had dry rot and underneath the floorboards were the original stone flags.
All right.
So that was quite interesting. And this particular spirit, this entity, used to focus on Sarah's younger sister, and used to bang on her bedroom door every night. And Sarah's sister used to come out with a big log list of expletives, telling him to go away, and he used to stop.
It works.
But he used to come back every night and do it again, and she'd shout expletives and go away, and he'd stop. So it was quite interesting in that respect, very interactive. One particular evening, Sarah's grandparents were actually staying over at the farm, and her granddad had poured himself a glass of whiskey, and he'd put it on the sideboard in the lounge area. And he'd walked across the room, and as he turned to go back to go and pick his glass up, the glass actually levitated off the sideboard and levitated across the room into the middle of the room in front of him, and then just dropped to the floor. And I mean, he told me this story when he was alive, and there was absolutely no bull, shall we say. I could tell that he was being absolutely 100% honest. What he was telling me, he said, it was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. So, very strong poltergeist activity. Really, really interesting place.
I find it really frustrating to hear these levitation stories because they're out there. We've had clients who have said, sat on the couch and the TV remote just has like lowered out in thin air.
Yeah,
my grandma, who she's 103 now, I think, but she's like such a straight woman, and she swears that when they used to do like seances, the table would levitate, and we've asked for levitations of tables. And not had it. So I'm really jealous that anyone's witnessed that, because surely that would be life-changing.
Yeah. Well, it was for him, to be honest. I mean, he was very down to earth, very very level-headed, and yeah, he said it was probably one of the most amazing things he'd ever seen, and it was also it was also witnessed by Sarah's grandma who was in the room at the time, and she was a little bit more. Well, no, there must be an explanation for it, but there, there wasn't. There couldn't be.
No.
It was
Yeah.
quite amazing, really.
So as well as ghosts, you obviously either speak to people about UFOs and stuff. And you mentioned it earlier. I was just wondering whether it's you're more of a nutcase to believe in UFOs. I feel like I would be much more reticent to say I'm all over UFOs. And however, I'm just as into UFOs as I am ghosts. And I think UFOs are now probably closer to being proven.
I think they probably are. I think the problem with UFOs is that you do get people who are very skeptical about abductions and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think there are quite a lot of people. I think there's a difference between paranormal and UFOs. And I'm quite I don't I'm quite sort of anti how can I put it? I don't like profiteering from this type of subject. So there's a lot of profiteering goes on, and especially in the UFO circles, there are a lot of people who seem to make quite a good living out of recycling the same old stories about UFOs, and certain people who have been, abducted over the years, who seem to make quite a good living out of it. And I tend to be a little bit more skeptical about the UFO side of things. Sightings, I have talked to people aplenty about sightings, and this area in particular, and in fact the whole of Lancashire, going down to the Peak District, going over towards going up to Cumbria, Morecambe Bay area, all around there. Research that I've done, the people I've spoke to, I am convinced that there are things that have been seen in the sky. When it comes to abductions, I think there are some people who are making quite a good living out of stories that I think you can pick holes in. Now, there are some abduction stories that I think are very credible. So, for instance, the Alan Godfrey story, Todmorden, Todmorden UFO, early 80s, 1980, I think it was. PC Alan Godfrey. I think when you look at that, when you read what he said, when you look at the regression that he went through, and analysis and everything else, and the way that he speaks about what happened to him is convincing. And I'm convinced. And he has not gone out. In fact, he's gone out of his way to try and distance himself from it. But people still bother him for interviews. People still, and in fact, I believe there's a film being made of it, or has been made, and will be out probably shortly, which I think going to be really interesting. I know he was involved in that, and actually I spoke to Alan, and I asked if I could interview him, and at the time, he said he wasn't doing any more interviews because he was poor health, and he didn't, he wanted to take a step back from it, which is fine. I totally respect that. On the other side of the coin, I think there are people who, and I won't mention individual cases, but I think certainly a lot of them are, over on the other side of the Atlantic, where there does seem to be this cult of UFO abductions going on, and these so-called experts that are very heavily involved in UFOs and very heavily involved in research and abductions and that sort of thing. They just seem to churn out the same tired old rhetoric time and time again, and they seem to make a massive living out of it. And I think it just gives the whole subject a little bit less credibility, shall we say, to my mind. But then, of course, you've got people in the paranormal world that are equally, I think, as uncredible, if that's the right word, who seem to make quite a good living out of doing investigations which are quite clearly bogus. And I mean, it's a subject that I can talk about for hours because it does really wind me up. And I mean, for instance, I live very close to Pendle Hill, and when we're recording this, it's the 16th of October. In a couple of weeks, it'll be Halloween. There will be, any number of tour groups, driving around Pendle Hill and visiting various different places, and people are being charged a lot of money for really what I would class as ghost tourism.
It's big.
It's massive, and I do think it gives the whole subject a little bit of a bad name, and it's people such as myself who I think I'm more of a credible investigator and a credible witness and somebody who collects stories and so on. I think it can sometimes taint what we do. People such as yourself as well. Genuine investigators. I think it can give us a bit of a bad name because there are people out there who are just simply using the subject to make money, and it just galls me a little bit that we sometimes get lumped in with these people when in fact we're the serious investigators, we're the serious researchers, and these people aren't. So when it comes to UFOs, I think it's very similar. I think there's a lot of people, especially out in America, these people who've been living for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years on the back of being abducted, and or they say they've been abducted, when actually you look at the stories and you look at some of the accounts, they are, in my opinion anyway, less than credible.
But America, you're over there in the country of Area 51. I suppose there's going to be, it's equally as likely that they've been abducted, and it's equally they've made it up because it's very cultural, it's very easy money. It's unprovable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and this is something that's been going back years. I mean, I think we're just starting to catch up really in this country now with regards to the UFO phenomena. I think it's becoming more and more, people are becoming more and more interested in it. Whereas, you're going back to the early 50s and Roswell. And I think it's ever since then. So you've got sort of 70 years of abductions going on over there. And I'm not being disrespectful to any American viewers that you've got. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that there are some genuine cases, both UFOs and paranormal, and it just seems to be a little bit more theatrical over there, shall we say, than it is in this country.
So how do you feel about cryptids? Have you heard some good stories? Do you have any theories?
Well, cryptids, it's interesting actually asked me about that, because I did a live stream last week with Andy Booth and his Chords of the Unknown live stream, and he was talking a lot about cryptids, and cryptids really isn't my strong suit, to be honest.
Okay.
I do believe that there are big cats out there. I think to believe otherwise would be silly, simply because I think big cats have got out of captivity over the years. Certainly, obviously going back to 1973 when they brought the Exotic Animals Act in. I think a lot of them were just let loose there and then. I think they've obviously bred over the years and they've survived. And I think there is photographic evidence that has been gathered over the years and eyewitness accounts that would seem to suggest that there are puma-sized, panther-sized large cats out there that are quite happily living alongside us humans. You know, there's certainly plenty of food for them. I mean, up here in Lancashire, for instance, quite rural where I live. We're out in the countryside. We do have a deer problem.
Yeah.
You know, and a fully grown deer is going to be a fairly substantial meal for a panther-sized cat. Interestingly, I spent some time down in Cornwall during the summer. It was actually during the heat wave, and it was the hottest. The Friday that we were down there was the hottest day that Cornwall had ever had,
Yeah.
and it was hot. But we were staying near Bodmin Moor, which is a
Oh,
very,
yeah.
very interesting place. Very, very interesting place.
Mm.
We were up actually on the moor, staying at a farmhouse. Well, it was a working farm actually. And I was talking to one of the guys who was the farmhand. He was the main farmhand on the small home. And they had sheep, cows, pigs, the whole works, chickens. You know, really, really interesting guy to talk to. And I just mentioned to him about the beast of Bodmin.
Yeah.
I said, "What are your thoughts on it?" And he said, "Well, I'll tell you now." He said, "There's something out there." He says, "Because we've had sheep up trees."
Wow.
You know, they've found dead sheep carcasses, half-eaten sheep carcasses up trees. Now, the first thing that a panther or a cheetah or whatever does out on the plains in Africa is when it gets an antelope, it drags it up a tree.
Yep. Seen pictures,
So,
yeah.
so you know, it's the same type of behaviour. And you know, I mean, down in the southwest, there's huge areas of unpopulated land. Where I am here, I'm very close to the Forest of Bowland, which is a huge area of unpopulated land, and you've got all sorts of terrain. You've got wooded areas, lakes, rivers, fells, even you know mountains when you go up to like Pennygent and places like that, Whernside, Ingleborough. You know, it's all different types of habitat, and so I have got absolutely no doubt whatsoever that there are big cats out there. Now you then start moving towards things like you know, Dogman, for instance. Do I believe in Dogman? I don't know, because I've never encountered anything like that. I've never seen any evidence. All I can go off is what other people claim to have seen over the years. You know, and then you know, Yetis or whatever our equivalent Sasquatch or whatever. Again, you know, I mean, it's interesting, even for a very populated island like Great Britain, we actually only populate, I think it's about 9 or 10% of the actual landmass
Yeah.
that's actually built up. And we'll, you know, we only live in about a tenth of the landmass. And so there are still huge areas of the country that are unpopulated. And it is feasible that there could be creatures out there that we occasionally come across or we occasionally glimpse that are living with us, but because of the fact that you know we are actually quite an unpopulated island. I mean, people find it difficult to believe, but when you look at a map and you look at the urban centres, they are very you know, condensed into small areas. London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow. They're actually quite small in comparison to the rest of the country, and they're just very concentrated urban areas. And you know, there are vast swathes of the country right from the south up to the north, and especially when you start getting up into Scotland and Wales and those sort of
Yeah.
areas, you know, the North Yorkshire Moors, for instance, there are areas that have never been populated. They may be farmed, never been populated really, and so there could be all sorts living out there. So yeah, I mean, cryptids are an interesting subject. It's not something that I'm an expert on, and I would never pretend to be an expert. And if somebody said to me, "Well, actually, I've seen, you know, a dog man," then but who am I to say that they haven't? You know, and
Yeah.
it's the same. It's the same with any subject. Until somebody can prove something either positively or negatively, if they can prove it's happened or they can prove it hasn't happened, then I have to sit on the fence as an investigator. I have to sit on the fence and you know just look at the evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as for, have you got any guests planned then for your upcoming shows, or is it anything you want to tackle in the future? What's the plans for your podcast, basically?
I would actually like to talk to some people about cryptids. I've done quite a bit on. I have interviewed people about cryptids,
Mm.
but I think it's a subject that I'd like to investigate more. So I've got a couple of people lined up. I've got a big long list of people actually that I do need to contact. I have taken a little bit of a back step over the last sort of month or so, really, with the podcast, just to have a little bit of a break,
Mm.
simply because it's quite time consuming, and it also can sometimes people don't realise it's a bit stressful sometimes trying to get guests, trying to book guests. And things happen, life gets in the way, people cancel on you, you have to cancel on them for whatever reason, and it can be quite stressful sometimes. So one of the things that I really enjoy about doing the podcast is getting really good feedback from people, because it does make it all that little bit more worthwhile, the
Yeah.
effort that you put into it.
Mm.
And I do enjoy guesting. I enjoy being on this side of the podcast, as it were. So I've had some great guests over the years. There are a few returning guests that I'd like to contact, speak to again. And as I say, I've got a list of people that I really do need to fire a few emails off to. And interestingly, next week, so we're doing this on a Sunday evening. Next Sunday, I'm actually doing some filming for an Amazon series
Cool.
with a company called Paranormal Misfits. So they are doing a series for Amazon about the paranormal, about UFOs, about cryptids, and they contacted me and asked me if I'd like to go along and do some filming with regards to the paranormal. So I am equally as excited and petrified in equal measures
Yeah.
about going along and doing that. But it'll be nice. It'll get my face out there. Whether I'll be recognised when I'm shopping in Lidl one Saturday morning, who knows?
Yeah.
That could be quite interesting, but that's going to be quite interesting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and just carrying on, really trying to speak to as many interesting people as I can.
Yeah.
I do find some people are more interesting than others. I find some are more credible than others. But everybody's got a story to tell. Who am I to say whether their story is flight or fancy, shall we say?
Yeah. Yeah. You
Fictional.
touched on needing a break and things. I think with a podcast world, once you're locked in into a schedule, it's very difficult to break that schedule, and becomes work, doesn't it?
Yeah,
You don't need guests dropping out on you. Whereas, because this is our second channel, obviously the ghost thing is our main, which is not scheduled either. But I refuse to make this channel scheduled.
yeah.
It's purely when we want, because I don't want to get into that habit of having a stress. It's meant to be pleasurable.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I started it as a hobby, and I started it as something that I wanted to be pleasurable and something that I enjoyed doing. And you're right, there is a pressure, not only to compete with other podcasts,
Mm.
but also to keep churning out content. And I have followed other people's podcasts. I've followed various radio shows over the years, and you do find that sometimes people are just regurgitating the same
Yeah.
stuff time and time again, and it's going back to the same guests time and time again. And despite the fact that I've spoken to some people who are fascinating, who I've really enjoyed speaking to, I could rhyme them off the ones that I've really enjoyed talking to, and I'd love to go back and speak to, and I will go back and speak to. But I do think that variety is more important sometimes than just keep bringing the same people back on week after week after week. And
Yeah.
some people do tend to do that, and with all due respect, it can get a little bit tedious because they're just talking about the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to keep it fresh, you have to find new guests, and to find new guests, it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. I know that, I mean, I've only just recently got into being a guest on some podcasts, but I've noticed straight away that you end up telling the same stories because the same
Yeah.
questions get asked. What
Yeah,
is the scariest thing? And it's like, why don't you ask me what the second scariest thing is?
yeah,
Do you know what I
exactly.
mean?
Yeah. I
What
mean,
was it?
people always start off with the question, how did you get into the paranormal?
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, you do, as much as I enjoy coming on and talking to people, and I much as I enjoy doing this, sometimes you actually, in the back of your mind, I'm thinking, right, I'm going over the same old
Yeah.
ground again. I'm telling the same old stories again. Let's just talk about something a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I understand from a host's point of view that you want to know all about that person, and so you want to know about their experiences, you want to know about the books, you want to know about the podcast.
Yeah.
But from a guest point of view, it's sort of like, it's a bit deja vu, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is nice just to talk about different things.
Yeah. So if I was to throw you a question now, right? And if you could think off the top of your head, and you've got time because I can edit it out.
No, go
But as
on,
a final
just
question,
throw it at me.
think of something that you have in your arsenal, but you don't tend to talk about. Think of something,
um
and we
well,
can edit it.
No, strangely enough, I don't get to talk about the Pendle Witches an awful lot,
Okay.
which is interesting, really, because in both of the books I actually go into various different aspects of the Pendle Witches quite a lot. I think what it is, I'm quite defensive of the story of the Pendle Witches, simply because I tend to look at it from a historical point of view. And from a folklore point of view, and actually from a Wiccan point of view. I've done a little bit of research into Wicca, sorry, I apologise. And I've got a really cracking book at the minute that I'm reading. You're going to ask me what the title is, and I can't
Yeah.
remember it.
So,
But no, it was recommended to me by a very good friend of mine, actually, who called Mariliza, who I still would love to interview. Mariliza, if you're watching this, and I'll make sure that I send you the link. I'd still love to chat with you. I know you haven't been well, sweetheart. I know you've been poorly, but I'd love to talk to you. She's a practicing Wiccan, Wiccan. And she put me onto a book because I'm really interested in the subject. And there's a lot of links to the Pendle Witches, and the sort of socio aspect of who they were, why they acted in the way that they did, why they got it, why they were unfortunately involved in the witch hunts that were going on at the time, the evidence that was leveled against them, what they believed, how they viewed themselves, and why they ended up, being tried and convicted of some quite outrageous um, things that were leveled at them. And so the whole story is not about women on broomsticks flying around and casting spells with black cats, which is what people tend to think. And there's an
yeah.
awful lot of witch tourism, as I mentioned before. Coming up to Halloween, it is horrendous, and all right, people enjoy it, and I wouldn't take that enjoyment away from people, but it's not. It irks me sometimes because it's not the right story, and we need to treat the memory of these people with respect, because it was a massive miscarriage of justice. I mean, very similar to, there is actually a quite a drive at the minute for the Pendle witches to be pardoned in Parliament. In the same way that there was, I think it's somewhere up in the region of about 5,000 people in Scotland during the same time who've just been pardoned by the Scottish Parliament for being wrongly accused of witchcraft. And
Right.
a lot of these people, you know, were executed, lost their lives. They happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they were, you know, people who were maybe slightly on the periphery of society at the time, and it was exactly the same with the Pendle witches. They were very poor, they were very uneducated. They believed in things which, you know, those that wanted to root out witchcraft and find witches could very easily use against them, and you know, level accusations against them of witchcraft. And a lot of the time there were, you know, words were put into the mouths when they were interviewed. There was, you know, suggestions that they did A, B, and C, and you know, they agreed even though they didn't.
Yeah.
And so I think when you look at the actual story of it, you look at the records of the trials and everything else, it's actually a really tragic story. And yet, unfortunately, most people don't actually realise what went on. You know,
Yeah.
it's all about pointy hats and cauldrons and broomsticks, and that's really not what it was about. And so I really enjoy talking to people about that story, because it's something that I've researched. It's something that there is a lot of information out there. It's from limited sources, but it's interesting how historians have interpreted some of the things that you know have been recorded, and the more you look into it, the more fascinating as a story it becomes. And it really is a sort of looking glass really into a particular time in our history, which was pretty unpleasant for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, that's gonna make me say that Lucy of our team, who's going to be a co-host, she's going to do some interviews hopefully for this channel. She lives Pendle Way, not far from you.
Okay, all right.
And
I'd love to chat with her then.
yes, because Janet, who is of the Pendle Witches,
Yeah.
she's come through several times for
Okay.
Lucy, and if we can get answers from Janet that you can look into your research,
Yeah.
and then say whether it's true or not, could be an interesting thing. So yeah, like I say, she's not far from yourself.
Okay.
And Janet, apparently, we don't know. I'm not saying for sure, but it certainly seems so.
Yeah.
And so maybe we could fact swap and see, you know, what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that'll be an interesting thing to do. That.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap now, Craig. But I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have as well. It's been great. Thanks for having me as your first guest on your fledgling channel, and yeah, best of luck with it. Best of luck. With it.
Well, chances are we'll speak again. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'd love to speak to you. Love to keep in touch, and yeah, I'm following your investigations with a very keen eye, because they're very interesting. So.
Well, thanks, mate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Bye.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye bye.